Hello again, welcome back to a video. Today's video, another video from today, will be about the Kuznets curve. Now, to explain Kuznets curve relatively basically, the initial one was that as development goes on, the inequality of a people initially increases, but then decreases over time. Typically, it's marked by first agriculture, as most economies start off agrarian, not including nomadic societies. Then you hit industry, and then eventually you transition into a service economy. Now, the initial Kuznets curve was largely proven false, and I say largely simply because we have many examples of countries gaining economic development yet continuing to rise in economic inequality. For example, the United States economy. Following the 80s, we saw enormous economic growth and development, but inequality rose as well. In fact, one of the main complaints a lot of people on the left have with the 80s is that they consider the policies Reagan enacted to basically be selling out the inequality of the people for economic development. Here's what we do know, though, for certain. On the environmental level, it is largely true. So converting it to an environmental curve where start off with pre-industrial, industrial, and I'd say post-industrial, but really it's better described as new industrial developments. We see an actual relationship similar to this, where what ends up happening is as societies start off, lots of the pollution is just cows, standard human waste, the usual. But as industry starts kicking up, you see the environment get worse and worse and worse until, let me make sure it's pollution, so that's accurate, until eventually it starts going down. Now, why does it start going down? The initial proposal would suggest that it goes down because as industry transfers to service economies, production is reduced. But on all, that's not really it. It's better explained through supply and demand. See, as demand goes up, for, let's say, plastic as an example, supply goes down over time. Because, plain and simply, there are more people using more of it, and the initial industry that produces it can't keep up. So what ends up happening is you have costs rise, and you see greater pressure on companies. Just think about it. When we were first industrializing, coal was basically plentiful, at least in terms of the fact that people could get it, especially during the Industrial Revolution, where a lot of modern advancements allowed quick and easy access to coal. For example, the atmospheric engine and other modern methods to successfully pull coal out of the ground allowed for cheap and easy coal to be used as fuel for industrial society. Eventually it was replaced by oil because it was even cheaper to literally just pump out, but starting off, it was just cheaper to get coal, and it allowed for the rise of industry because it was cheap and easy. But because people didn't care about it as much because it was plentiful, they burnt it with little care about waste. So pollution went up. But think about it as it became more expensive because of higher demand. I mentioned oil already, and that happened like here. But oil too became expensive, and so people started switching to electricity. And electricity, well, was still on that. See, the greater the cost rise, the greater the pressure it is, the more efficient things become, because that is the requirement to keep going. For example, Water bottles. You'll notice water bottles aren't flat, despite, let's face it, that being a far easier thing to do, is just make a flat, standardized water bottle. Then you can just pick up the shelves, buy it as plastic, and then go. In fact, if you look at water bottles used for things like just general use repeatedly, that's exactly what we see. Instead, we see more intricate designs for plastic bottles when it comes to, well, purchasing it as plastic for single-use bottles. And there's a reason. See, more efficiency becomes required as development goes on because there's greater demand, and so the supply, in order to keep up, must become more efficient at using what it has. And thus, you see a downward trend because as things are being produced more and more and more, these points greatly increase, and so this accelerates. You become more and more able to efficiently produce that which you need. It's why we see in a lot of first world economies, they're closer to this side than this side. In fact, a lot of countries we see nowadays, like China, would be about here, which I call Mao's Rebellion because they don't deserve the title. Meanwhile, India's right around here. They're still developing, so they don't need to be as efficient because they have the resources. Mao's Rebellion has the people. They don't need to automate to make things more efficient. India has the resources. They don't need to make things less polluting because they aren't in as much of a deficit as, say, the US would be if we started being as wasteful as they are. And so, as a result, the environment and its quality improves over time as things become more efficient through free market economics. It is thus advantageous to encourage free markets to result in this. Because think about it, if everyone has a demand for plastic, what do you think is going to happen? 1, they're going to make more efficient use of it. 2, they're going to find alternatives. And 3, they're going to see if they can make it as efficiently as possible, which means reducing pollution when creating it, making it more effective, and reducing the resource costs associated with, meaning less oil used. And so, the result is, over time, environmental pollution will go down. This is why we see, for example, the Soviet Union being far more polluting than most other countries because they were still toiling around, let's say, here. They were still trying to basically make it so that they just had an economy. Because they already built a lot under the 5-year plans. But now they had to maintain that, and sure, some efficiency methods were taken, but their economic model was not built for efficiency in mind. It was built to give people jobs, get things produced. Not good things, not efficient things, just things. Meanwhile, the United States saw this. Certainly, part of it you could argue is environmental regulations, but most of it is just the free market playing out. There was no law that said, you must make your plastic bottles 80% more efficient, or whatever the percentage is now. They did that because it was profitable. Now granted, they're selling it for a huge markup, and I would advise not buying single-use plastic bottles for a simple matter of efficiency. In fact, stuff like this, even which I was given, so I'll take it for free, or a metal water bottle would be advisable due to, well, it being cheaper and more efficient, but that's besides the point. The fact is, as the demands on industry grow, at first you have enough cheap resources to allow for rapid but inefficient growth. Then, as pressure mounts, you will inevitably have efficiency becoming the way to continue development. Think about it. A lot of countries are already heavily built up, especially in the Western world. And so, they need to become more efficient in order to make the most, and just make anything that increases when it comes to production. For example, let's face it, the Netherlands is heavily settled and developed. Sure, they might get more land from the Zuiderzee works over time, but they're still working with fairly limited space, and so they had to get more efficient. Rail lines to improve travel, factories which are more efficient so that they produce more, a service economy which is effective at giving people what they want while automating what they can. That is what this is. The drive for efficiency due to development already stalling as a result of cheap resources no longer being as available. So in other words, you would not expect an industrial society just keep polluting more and more and more. Rather, as resources become scarce, they become more and more conservative in terms of how they use those resources for efficiency reasons, and thus, well, it will never reach zero. We will never have an environmental impact of zero. Even down here, there's still an environmental impact. We will get closer and closer over time. Maybe not by much, but over time that will occur, especially if development reaches this point for as many countries as possible, and as quickly as possible. So that is what should be done. Anyways, have a good one.